Hi, everyone. I wanted to do something different today for Teal Around the World because everyone already has so much tealiness. I thought that I would share things that I've never shared before. So don't expect the Brave New Work talk. Do not expect a inspirational rah, rah, rah. We should all do this big generic thing speech. Instead, I wanted to share a much more intimate story of what's going on inside the Ready. So how we work. What we've learned, what we've failed at, figured out, are still struggling with. And so I kind of wanted to set the stage with just some itch scratching on a few of those topics and then see what it breaks loose in terms of questions, observations, noticings, etc. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. All right, here we go. Inside the Ready. Let me start by catching you up for those of you that don't know a ton about the Ready, what's been going on with us. So we founded the company in 2015 with a fairly modest goal of changing the way the world works. We want to realize a more adaptive, equitable, meaningful, and human way of working. Obviously, I know that that is not something we're going to do alone. It's not the work of 20 people. It's the work of 8 billion people. But we really wanted to be an anchor in that space that could start to galvanize and build more momentum. Because to be quite frank, what we need to do has been known for a long time, but actually getting large systems to do it has been a struggle and an uphill battle for a very long while. So what's happened in that 5+ year span? We went from a single owner, that's me, LLC, to a benefit corporation with 24 shareholders, from 1 member to 25, then back down to 15, and then up to 20 again. And now we're growing quite fast for some reason. From 800,000 in revenue in the first year to 5.9 million in revenue last year, from 1 city to 20 cities, from 1 client to now, I think 84 and counting. So it's been a massive learning experience, and there's been some ups and downs, but on the whole, it does appear to be working. We do feel like we're moving in the direction of our purpose. We do feel like we're doing the best work of our lives. We do feel like it's hard, but we're enjoying it.
Yeah, Aaron, sorry to interrupt you. There's a color palette over on your screen, just a little above your presentation. Is it correct?
A color palette?
Yeah, like an RGB palette on top of it.
I don't see that on my screen at all. I
Okay.
only see my full screen slide. How interesting. Let's try a different kind of screen sharing. Let me see if this.
Yeah, now it's gone. Perfect. Thank you.
Clever. It's the you never want to share just keynote because it sucks. Okay, so we've worked with a lot of clients. I only show this just so you have a sense of the range. The diversity is quite high. Been in IKEA headquarters, been inside small nonprofits, been inside the Federal Reserve, Boeing, startups, companies that are dying, companies that are killing it. It's a massive range. And the big takeaway has been everybody has the same problems, from a t-shirt manufacturer in Manila to a innovation magazine in Ecuador. Everybody is dealing with the echo effect of traditional top-down bureaucratic HBR, management. And that's everywhere. This quote is my favorite quote when it comes to doing business and how I think about the work. And I always come back to it. I come back to it once a year and just reflect on it, which is, beware when fighting monsters that you yourself do not become a monster. It's very easy, I think, in our work to be inside large enterprise, to be inside rapidly scaling businesses, to be in contact with people who hold different principles or values about the work, and to be swept away in that as you scale, as you grow, as you become what you're going to become. I think it's very, very easy to adopt some of the things that you're working against. So we always come back to this. And one of the ways that we've tried to fight it from the get-go has been with a set of principles that guide our work, which is not a novel idea in this community at all, but I figured I'd share what they are, and that might trigger some interesting conversation. There are sort of 5 principles that have fed into the system over the years and driven decisions about what I'll show you when I show you how we work, ranging from transparency and the idea that information should be more symmetrical among people, that the default to being open, the default to being transparent is definitely the more kind of human way to be and is the better way to be in complexity. Autonomy, the idea that people need and appreciate freedom and deserve it, and that we shouldn't be creating environments at work that don't reflect our beliefs everywhere else. My favorite thing to joke about with people, at least here in the US, is that we literally die in war for the right to have a democracy in our government. We fight and we die for that right. And then we go to work and we work in a dictatorship all day. And we're totally fine with that. That is so bizarre to me. Consent, not consensus, not autocracy, but actually the idea of what is safe to try, what is reasonable, what is agreeable to us. Decentralization, really resisting the urge to over-functionalize, to over-rely on a central point of failure or a central point of deciding. And then the latest one for us has been JEDI, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, was not present in the beginning and has become more and more present in our work, both in the impact we're trying to have, but also how we're trying to grow our own community and think about our own way of working. Really trying to prioritize what does equity look like in the future of work is uncharted territory. And so we've been enjoying playing with that. If you put all this in a blender and just put it on high, you basically get 2 big ideas. One is we really want to be people positive, and the other is we want to be complexity conscious. So if you've read Brave New Work, you already know about that, but the big idea here is basically our beliefs about people and their nature, and our beliefs about the world and its nature are fundamentally shaping to what we do and how we do it. And so for the Ready, at least, we believe that people are fundamentally good and trustworthy and motivated, and that the world is mostly, not entirely, but mostly complex with lots of interconnections and lots of richness and lots of unexpected surprises. And the ability to predict or control what's going to happen is folly. A lie is a plan, or a plan is a lie committed to paper, all that kind of stuff. So we bring all that together into a general thesis about how we work. So now we'll start to dive a little bit more into what we do. The first thing is that we just really try to live in this loop. So what is our tension as a system, as individuals, as small teams, as the big team? What is the practice that we're currently doing, and what's the alternative that we could consider? And then how do we do experiments to bring it to life? And we really have, I think, almost to a fault, an experiment-friendly culture, a culture that is willing to just try anything, be a bit of a guinea pig, go to places that make us uncomfortable and be wrong. And we've done a lot of that. I mean, we've iterated the way we pay ourselves 5 times. We've changed the way we bring on members many times. We've hired the wrong people and had them stay too long. We've hired the right people and let them go too early. We've been the right and wrong people ourselves. So there's been a lot of learning, but there's a willingness in this community to do the most radical thing. And so if somebody has an idea of what we could learn by changing the way we spend money, changing the way we go to market, changing the way we sell, the way we decide, there's an openness to it. And this loop is at the heart of that. So fundamentally, last point about theory is that we really try to be more of a roundabout than a traffic light. And that starts with me and it extends all the way into the system. One of my guests on the podcast recently was Doug Kirkpatrick, who everybody here probably knows. And he was talking about Morningstar's early days and their 2 values of don't use force and keep commitments. And that just really resonated with me. Like, that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be committed to what we say we're going to do. We're trying to be in relationship with each other and in connection with each other. And we are trying not to have a system where any individual has to use force or command on another one to get what they want, which, turns out creates a lot of things to work on. And so for those of you that have seen the OS Canvas, these are the spaces that we think about and play in the most. And I wanted to share, I think, 8 sort of zoom ins on some of these sections with you today. So how we do certain things, not necessarily at an OS Canvas zone level, but to answer specific questions. And the way I decided what to share is I asked our community at the Ready, if you could only tell people a few things about how we work that you think are most interesting, what would you tell them? And they listed a bunch of stuff, and I used it as a kind of an architecture for our conversation today. So without further ado, here are those 8 things. And then my hope is this will provoke you to want to either dig deeper in one of them, challenge one of them, ask about one that we didn't talk about and how it relates, talk about the interconnections between them. We'll see what emerges. But I'll try to keep it to like 1 minute or so on each one. So how we govern is not going to be super unfamiliar to most of you. We do it through agreements. So we make agreements with each other. We make them through the principle of consent. And everything about the way we work is captured in an agreement that's documented and written down and transparent to everyone. And that at least up until this point, every agreement we had has been consented to by every member because we've been small enough to pull that off. So we haven't had to have like an unpacking of our structure. So what happens is when people have a question or a tension or an issue, they make a proposal. Everybody processes it in a process that would be familiar to anyone that's studied sociocracy or holacracy. We get to a point of consent on it, put it to bed and go live it for a while, and we iterate it on a regular basis. And all of our agreements are currently in Notion, which is a software system, notion.so, that allows us to categorize those. Although, as some of you may have noticed, we recently spun out a software company called Murmur, and Murmur will be the sort of system of record for agreements for the Ready and probably thousands of other companies going forward. So that product will launch in a couple months, but if you're interested, you can go to murmur.com and have a look at that. We love this agreement process, and it's cool. The thing I would say we struggle with the most is getting an even distribution of proposals and agreements from people that have less and more tenure, different life experiences, different backgrounds. We still, even after 5 years, tend to have people that have more tenure and more informal power in the system making proposals and being seen as kind of the gateways to breakthroughs on this stuff. But on the plus side, everybody has been able to have their voice heard in terms of shaping those things. And so we've been excited about that. And I'd say the Ready has on the order of about 40 agreements right now as a system, ranging from how we pay each other to how we meet to how we make decisions to when we retreat, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the things that I'll talk about have a governed agreement behind them. So that's governance. How we make decisions at an individual level is kind of interesting. So we do hold roles. Many of us hold multiple roles. Those roles have decision rights. But if you think about decisions and authority more generally, I feel like there are 2 kinds of systems you can build. You can build a permission-based system or a constraint-based system. In a permission-based system, nobody can do anything until they're told that they can do it. Congratulations, you've been promoted and now you can do X. You can't go to the bathroom without a bathroom pass, etc. In a constraint-based system, you can do anything until we tell you you can't. And at the Ready, as much as possible, we've tried to be a constraint-based system. So that means anybody in the system can do anything they want unless we've written down that they can't do it. And that has its, risks and concerns and feels and all that kind of stuff. But on the whole, we've been really happy with trying to hold to that thesis. And we have found that, people behave as you would expect them to behave. So if you treat people like criminals and expect them to act that way, they will. If you treat people like adults who are thoughtful and conscientious, they will, and life goes on. So we do most of our decisioning that way. Some roles and some decision spaces are carved out, and we usually offer that something is either specific to a role or specific to a role with advice. And so advice processes that I'm sure many of you have seen in other companies are present at the Ready as well. And it'll specify around that decision, like, hey, you got to go talk to 3 people, or hey, you have to talk to this role and this role to hear their point of view before you make this decision. But we fundamentally trust you to make that decision. And that plays out in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways it plays out is in how we staff projects. So in most agencies, consultancies that I've ever been a part of or observed, there's a staffing manager or a leader or a team that is figuring out who goes with who on what project and when, and kind of, dictating that to people, what they're going to work on. And at the Ready, we don't do that. So we think of it as a two-way marketplace where everybody has a right to say yes or no to a role opportunity on a project. And every project team has a right to say yes or no to a member of that team. So if a team is unhappy with one of their members, they can choose to ask them to step away. If a person is unhappy with the team they're on, they can choose to step away. If an opportunity comes up and the person that's architecting it, gets a lot of hand raises, they can collaboratively build that team together. So it is truly a marketplace. It operates like a free market in a way, with some gentle constraints around how we do this and what we need to have in place. And it also applies to what we take on. So a lot of people in an agency or a consultant or a service space often have to deal with, will you work with this kind of company? Will you work with that kind of company? What about your ethics? What about your morals? And what we found is that better than having one general thesis about what our moral stance is on who we'll work with is to just let the staff decide with their feet. And so when we have a project come in the door, the very first question is, can we assemble a team of willing participants to work on it? And if we can't, then it's a no. And it doesn't matter if that's because people are busy or because people don't believe in the purpose of that business or any other reason. It is purely based on, are there people that feel heart for that thing and are willing to make time and space for it? And so we've turned away, Fortune 100 clients because nobody wanted to work on it. And we've said yes to things that are very controversial because the team that did want to go there was like, look, we think that we can make a difference here. We think we can steer this thing a little bit or shape these lives, and we're going to do it. And so we kind of, I think, have come to appreciate the flexibility that provides and the integrity that provides, without having to take a stance on any particular thing and without having to make anybody do anything they don't want to do, which is very helpful. So that's how we think about staffing. How we pay ourselves is very related. And this is one of my favorite things that we've emerged over time. When we first started the company, we paid people a salary that we negotiated like a normal company. And it was transparent to other people what folks made, but we did not do anything innovative here. Where we are now is that every member of the company is paid a salary, which is like the lowest salary that you can pay and be an exempt employee in the most expensive state in the US, which I think is about $58,000 a year. And that's your membership. That's your member role. You're paid that amount. You get full benefits. You get all the trappings of working at the Ready in terms of access and rights and all those sorts of things. And then you have a compensation stack that you build from there. So if you take on a piece of client work, you get paid for that. But you get paid for that as a role on that project team. And each member sets their own rate with advice. So we don't tell people what they should make. They decide what they think is market for them. And they get advice from the people around them on whether that's high or low or just right. We look for bias. We look for, different kinds of alignment. We look for how it maps to mastery. But at the end of the day, if you want to charge $20,000 a month and somebody else wants to charge $2,000 a month, as long as we don't see any Jedi issues hiding in there, we're open to that. And what's nice about it is that people that are underpaid generally are in high demand and they can raise their rate because they feel the pressure of that demand. People that are in maybe possibly paying themselves too much for the market are in less high demand and ultimately have to either find and sell their own projects that are willing to pay at that rate or change their rate opportunistically to access more work. Because again, there's nobody making sure that everybody has enough. There's an ecosystem, there's a marketplace. And so if I'm a member making my default rate, that's the guaranteed part. But the rest of it is, am I finding work or am I finding work to join? And am I moving fluidly across this ecosystem to do that? We also have other parts of the comp stack, like key roles. So there are certain roles that we govern in our system as agreements that are especially valuable to the company and that take a certain amount of time. And so we pay for those roles. We learned through trial and error that people will do that work anyway, but the ones that do tend to give too much of themselves and burn out and feel underappreciated. And the few things that we really do need to get done do not get done with the same intensity if they're not compensated. And so we started to pay key roles a certain fee, like a monthly fee, just like a project. And so now people have their member rate, their default rate if they're doing project work, key roles that they might hold. If you're obviously a consultant, you're going to have both of those things. If you're someone that works more internally, like myself or my colleague Sarah, it's mostly just member and key role pay that makes you able to pay your mortgage. And then we have one final thing, which I'll talk about in another slide, which is we have compensation for initiatives that we do internally. But the nice thing about this payment model is that it's very self-directed. The hard thing about it is that people struggle to set their rate. There are all kinds of questions about value and values, bias and discrimination, history and the present moment, value inside the ready versus value in the outside market. Just because I could go be a venture capitalist, does that mean I should make that money inside the ready, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a lot of learning about how to talk about and advise about how to set rates in a way that makes everyone feel recognized and like they're getting a fair shake. But on the whole, we've been very excited about it. And it has eliminated the need to manage raises and bonuses and annual assessments and performance management and ranking and stacking and all that shit. Like, we just don't have to think about any of that. Instead, we just live in a lot more conversation. So that is that's the comp side, which is one of the more interesting sticky sides. The next one I wanted to talk about is how we meet and retreat. I'm a big fan of rhymes and alliteration. So we are the kind of company, because we're a services business and we work with clients, we have a shoemaker's kids problem, which is like, we talk a lot about eliminating meetings and minimizing the amount of time you spend and not doing the great deep work that you want to do. But then we're invited to every freaking meeting for every company we work with, and we are buried in all of that. So we spend more time in Zoom than anybody on earth, even though we're publicly talking about how you shouldn't. And so what we've struggled with over the years is how to have a meeting rhythm for the company that doesn't make us just want to, put a cheese grater on our arm. Like, how many meetings a week do we really have to be in yet another Zoom together? And we've played with it a lot. And where we've landed is that we have a rhythm and a ritual around Fridays. So we have client work Monday through Thursday. Fridays, we try to take a little bit of a rest and a reprieve. And Friday mornings in particular, we have a 90-minute meeting slot that we rotate every week to a different theme that allows us to get what we need done. So once a month, that meeting is focused on growth and managing our pipeline and our hiring and our talent and all that in a kind of a fluid way. Once a month, we're focused on what we call an OS coffee, which is like a lean coffee, but it's basically an open AMA, ask each other anything, talk about anything space that we build dynamically during that session. We have one meeting that's more recently been added as we've changed our priorities, that's focused on JEDI. So where we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, the ready, how it shows up in our work, how it shows up in our culture, issues that we've had, struggles that we've had. So that, that kind of drives the agenda. And then every 4 months, we take a retreat. So we actually take a week off, we go dark, we do not do client work, and we just spend the week in reflection with each other, not with each other, in bed, wherever we need to be. But there is, programming for 4 or 5 hours each day. And then there's, open space around that. And we've been doing that since we were founded. That's been a very disciplined and kind of rhythmic thing. Every 120 days, take that week, bleed the pressure, learn about ourselves, change ourselves, evolve ourselves, argue about the stuff we're talking about today, and then, see where we go from there. And the most recent retreat, which is fun, and we actually talked about this in the podcast we recorded today, but in the most recent retreat, we actually went into Oculus and went into virtual reality together, which was really fun and goofy and full of joy and full of mistakes. But it was nice to be in what felt like physical proximity with each other. So that's the operating rhythm. That is one of the things that has moved and shifted the most in our history. We're never happy with it. It's always moving, and we've just given ourselves over to that. So as soon as we feel like we're craving more sharing, we stand up a meeting where we're doing more sharing about projects. As soon as we're sick of that, we cancel it. So there's just a lot of inhaling and exhaling around operating rhythm at the ready. And I don't think we'll ever get it right, and I don't care. The next thing that's connected to retreat and connected to pay, as I mentioned, is how we innovate. So in a company like this, where there's no one setting a central strategy, where there's nobody, centrally controlling funds, There are questions about how you innovate, how you move the work forward, how you create change. And we've stumbled into something here that I'm really proud of, which is at that retreat every 120 days, we do a lot of sense making around our purpose, our essential intent, where we've been, where we're going, our retrospective, et cetera, and where the market is. And then we have a very open and generative discussion about what might we want to invest our money in? What might we want to do or try? And there are a series of stages we go through, but basically people end up with proposals on the board in Notion for, I think we should launch a foreign language version of the tension and practice cards. I think we should start a Jedi chapter and fund a trainer. I think we should, and this is one I did recently within the last year, I think we should spin out a software company. And the investments range from $5,000 to, we did one this time that was an investment idea of what to do with some of our saved cash that was like a $250,000 investment fund for startups and for value aligned public companies that we believe in. So there's a huge range in terms of leverage. And the idea is that that's where new things are born. So if you want to start a podcast, if you want to start a magazine, if you want to try serving a new client in a different way, you can get an initiative proposed. If the group consents to that initiative, it's funded. The funding is yours to do with as you please, as long as you have transparency back to us about what you did and what you learned. And the people that steward those projects then have the ability to pay themselves and pay other members to bring that stuff to life. So for example, when we didn't have training, we did 3 trimesters in a row of training initiative funding. And Allie on our team, who led that, stood up that whole idea, built curriculum with other members, paid herself, paid other members, essentially built a function that would have normally been like a department of a company as an initiative on the fly, on the side, and then now can decide, like, does this become permanent roles? Do we need to hire into these roles? But it gives us a way to test into the future rather than just starting with like, we need a training group. We need to hire 5 training people and build a training department. Do we? Or maybe what's the first bite, right? And what's something that we can invest in that will teach us something as we go. So everything that you've experienced from the Ready, from the book to the podcast to the way we hire, it has its origins in that kind of a process or a thinking. So that's how we think about initiatives. And we spend a not significant, but not crazy amount of money on them. I would say the average trimester, we probably invest in about $110,000 of innovation. Some of that operational, some of that business focused, we don't care. It's what's needed now, right? So we kind of tune into that. It probably works out to be like 2 or 3% of the money we spend generally. Rounding third base here now, almost towards the end of me being a monologue, which is good and bad. How we hire and onboard. So we've radically reinvented the hiring process at the Ready over the last year. We really came to grips with the fact that there's just a lot of bias in hiring. Like the Ready, to be really frank, up until a year and a half ago, was a really white place to work. And it wasn't because we didn't care about diversity or any of those other things. It was because systemically, we had not changed the operating system to reflect those values. And so what happened was people look at a resume, they look at a face, they look at a name, and gently and slowly, they choose people that look and feel like themselves. And we found that to be unacceptable anymore. And so my colleague and co-host on the podcast, Rodney, and several other members of our team really went after that and started to learn how to reduce bias in the process, how to have more of a blind process, a multivariate process where people are being evaluated in new and different ways, and where we don't really know who someone is until we've already decided that we're excited about the way they think about our space and what they're capable of. And that has been really exciting and really rewarding and has totally changed our pipeline top to bottom. We're not happy with it yet. We're not all the way there, but it is double-digit differences in terms of who we're attracting, who's making it through to different stages, and who we're bringing onto the team. So we're very excited about that. And then the last thing I'll say about onboarding is we've learned that it's very hard to find out if someone is a good fit for the Ready through an interview process. We can do our best, But at the end of the day, complexity means that like the rubber meets the road when it meets the road. And so for them and for us, we've created a prologue period, a 6-month prologue period, where people are in their Ready membership prologue and they have access to everything. They're paid the same way. They have the ability to participate in all the same things. The only thing they don't have is a governance right. They don't have a right to consent within our governance meeting because they're sort of in that liminal space between being really committed to the Ready and not in the Ready. And so they observe governance, they're beholden to it, they participate, they offer opinions, they play every other role in the house. But when it comes to governance and a couple other things that are related to governance, they don't play until they get to the end of that prologue. And at the end of the prologue, we both look at each other and decide if this is for us. So if the people that have worked with them on the Ready side are not, what we call a hell yes, then, we support them and ask them to step away from the Ready and try to make that as financially painless as possible. And if they feel like this wasn't for them at any time, they're welcome to do the same thing. And if both sides feel a love connection, then we move forward with a membership, and then that person has all the access and rights that everyone else has. And after a full calendar year at the Ready, you're eligible for employee ownership as well. So we distribute stock every year that dilutes the current shareholders and includes the new shareholders, which is everyone that has worked there for more than a calendar year. And so over time, the ownership of the firm is distributing out to the people that are active in the system, and it is reducing from the people that have either been here and left or that are less active in the system. So we kind of have a moving ownership model. It's not a cooperative. I'm definitely still the primary shareholder, but the long arc of time goal is that it becomes more and more and more and more decentralized. And so we built that mechanism to do that. How we handle money is directly connected to that ownership. So we pay all our bills. We make sure that we have enough in the bank for a few months of operation safely. And then from there, we follow a very deliberate path of funding initiatives, funding profit sharing to the members, funding dividends to the shareholders. And with what's left over at the end, we have a true investment opportunity. What do we do with that money? Do we save it, et cetera? Because we do dividends as a fixed amount to our shareholders, what's left over is subject to the advice and the guidance of the whole system. So we have a lot of input about what we should do with it. Should we save more? Should we spend more? Should we invest in growth? Should we, X, Y, or Z? And we all try to make those decisions as collectively as we possibly can. So that is how we think about money. And generally speaking, people are allowed to spend money at the Ready. Every single member of the Ready, including Prologue members, is offered a credit card the day they start. That credit card does not have a limit. We have the ability to spend money in service of the purpose, and we trust each other to do that. If you're uncomfortable about a purchase, you may ask someone else for advice. And then we have a limit of, if it's not related to a project, $3,000 per trimester per member, where we're saying, if you're going to spend more than that and it's not related to operations, like active operations, then just, ask for advice and find out what the group has to say. But if you want to buy a computer, don't ask us, just do it. If you need to go to a training course, don't ask us, just do it. If the project needs to fly first class to wherever, and that's for a good reason, you manage your margin, right? And we have a margin target at the project level that is the only control in the financial system. So projects need to achieve a certain amount of margin, gross margin, manage that as a P&L, and each project team is essentially a little company, and they manage to that. And beyond that, we don't know. I have no idea what any of our teams spent money on last month. I have no idea, whether it made sense or not. We just trust each other into that, and we look at the numbers together at the end of every month and at the end of every trimester and at the end of every year to see if we're steering the business in the right direction. And on the whole, this company has been profitable 11 months out of every year, and every year on the whole since its inception. We have never not averaged profitability for the year, and we have only had a few months in our history where we weren't profitable for the month. So it's been, on the whole, very successful, and we're very proud of that. It's hard, again, because people have a lot of baggage about money, myself included. I mean, I've been criticized many times for feeling like I'm trying to over optimize or, focus on the economics of the system rather than the members, when that's not my intent, but it is my baggage. And so I think we've had to learn lessons, each of us, about how to be in a system where money is a more fluid thing and a more public thing. Everybody knows what everybody makes. Everybody can ask about that. So it does require that we kind of build our money maturity, and that has been challenging, but fruitful. Last thing I'll say is none of this, was directly our own, idea. Like we've learned a ton from the community that's on Zoom today, or, Teal Around the World, people that are speaking, people that are watching. There are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of companies that have informed the way we think about this stuff, challenged us, stretched us. And to the extent that any of this is a little idiosyncratic or unique, it's only because it became that way under stress when we actually tried to do it. But we are really appreciative of this community for giving us the ideas of what to try. And we also, if we fancy ourselves anything, we just fancy ourselves brave to try stuff and break stuff. So that's where we hope to excel. If we're respected for anything, we would like to be respected for being willing and finding out. And so that is something I really wanted to say, so that it doesn't come off as we invented or created anything. I think we have been willing to jump into a pool that was filled with other people's water. And what we're wrestling with now is what I call the last mile. Like, there are a lot of things that I left unspecified at the beginning that now come back to us and that we have to revisit. We still don't really know how we invite members to leave the Ready after they've become full members. We really still don't know what we're trying to achieve from like a financial perspective. Are we trying to be profitable or not? What are we trying to do with that? We still don't know how to be in conflict with each other in a way that I consider to be really fully open and authentic and real and dangerous and hard. We're learning that, we're practicing that. And we sure as shit do not have Jedi figured out. We have a lot of work to do around bias and diversity and equity and inclusion, and how we manifest that in our system in a way that feels like we have some sense of mastery over it, like we have some sense of self, rather than a very reactive, very learning oriented approach. So I'm excited to work on that stuff as well. And with that being said, I'm ready to talk, and I'm sick of hearing my own voice. So I would love to hear what that provoked for anyone. And I am an open book.
Thank you so much, Aaron. So I think there's a lot of curiosity around the Jedi, and this is, I guess, the play into this whole concept. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about it?
So I think the way we think about it is that there is diversity. So just who's at the table. And for the Ready, that's been an area where we have work to do and have started to do that work. So different backgrounds, different perspectives, different stories, different ethnicities, all that stuff matters to us. And at the same time, we don't want every kind of diversity, right? There is what I had an old former colleague who talked about generative difference. I really like that term. Just because there are people out there who think differently than us and don't believe what we believe about some of our principles doesn't mean we necessarily want them in our tent. So we want generative diversity. So that's the first thing. Once you have that, then there's questions of inclusion. So who's at the table when we make decisions, when we talk, when we share? This is a place where I think the Ready does better. We have very inclusive, very transparent systems for knowing what's going on, for asking questions, for making decisions, for doing governance, for making agreements. We do feel like a team of equals in the process, even if we're not equal in our power, which I appreciate. And then there's equity, which is like so confusing, which is not, who's at the table and what do they look like, but is their chair the right height so that we can all see the same thing? And there you're dealing with historic oppression, differences in how people come to the system. So as an example, I'll give you an example of something very expensive for the Ready that serves to deal with equity. and it's connected to equity, the other kind of equity.
Mhm.
In most companies, when they give away stock, there is a chance to purchase that stock for the employee. And if you can't afford to purchase it, you can't have it. And if even in a company where they give it away, there's often a tax consequence, because when they gave you the stock, that was treated by the government as compensation. It's treated as a bonus. And so if someone gives you 10,000 in stock, the government treats it like you've got 10,000 in salary. It is very non-equitable to do that kind of stuff, because what it means is that people who come from privilege and have more or have had a better shake can buy stock, can get stock, can pay for the stock they get. And so what happens is that ownership accrues to people who have privilege. And so for the Ready, what we decided to do is, and it's super painful financially, but I just don't care. We give the stock away for free, always. No one ever buys stock at the Ready. And we pay the tax burden for the employee in full out of the Ready's checkbook, member by member, depending on what state they live in, what city, what country. Like, if there's tax owed, we pay it, so that nobody has to say no to the opportunity of ownership. And we've spent $500,000 on that probably over the course of our history, in money that we just wouldn't have had to spend if we went by the usual corporate playbook. So I'm proud of that. But what I'm not proud of is there's 15 other examples of inequity in our system that I don't know what to do about and that I don't know how to deal with. So I think there's room to grow.
Very, very interesting thoughts here. So in terms of your operating model, how big is the Ready right now?
I think we're right around 21 people.
Okay. And do you think it's scalable? Would you recommend your system to your clients?
So there are parts of it that are scalable and parts that are not. The way we do what we do works fractally. So as long as you're willing to organize your company into teams of teams, there's no reason that you can't do anything that I've just described. But I do think that you'd have to figure out how your governance works across that system. And where, do you have elected groups that make decisions for the body? Do you have rotations? Do you have positional authority that does that governance for the central control of the system? But our goal is have as little of that as possible. As we scale, keep it thin. And that certainly there are many people talking here today at Teal Around the World that have experience at scale that I don't have, and they'll tell you it's possible. You just have to modulate the agreements themselves to match that context.
Okay. Yeah, you have this very nice representation of membership, right? And that whole concept. Where did you draw that inspiration from in terms of shaping that whole setup?
I don't know that we drew inspiration. I think I just wanted it to feel right. I guess if I think harder about it, I guess where a lot of that comes from me is that I spent a lot of time as a child and a teenager playing music in bands and being part of theater groups where we were producing things together. We were making music together. We were making shows together. We were working in a way that felt very creative and collaborative. And I think I've always been trying to recapture that energy.
That's really nice. I think it's the first time that I heard, and I think it also resonates with most of your audience here today, Aaron, that does it translate to employment? Is there like a process of getting into membership, full or part-time or something? How does it
membership is employment. Yeah, like I said, that base member role is an employed, W-2, salaried position with full benefits and healthcare and all that. So all of our members are employees. That was not always the case. We still have members in certain parts of Europe that are technically contractors legally, but practically they're treated exactly the same way. But everyone in the US is an employee now. And frankly, that was because we couldn't innovate our way around the law. For a long time, we had members of different kinds. We had some that were contractors and some that were employees, and it was a choice that members could make. But the law has changed in California and several other states where if you are doing substantively what the company does, you are an employee. And if you are not treated as such, then they can come after you. So we didn't love that because it doesn't feel very future of work friendly to give people different ways to play. So we invented this new model of the stack of different kinds of comp to give us that like middle ground, that hybrid approach that still honors the law, but allows people to like be a part-time professor, be a parent, do more work one year than another year, and still be a member in different ways of relating to the system. So it's not perfect, but it's the best we can do in the legal system we have, and the legal system we have is like 30 years stuck in the past.
Yeah. There has been an ongoing talk around performance management throughout the whole conference in several different sessions. So I'm going to bring that question in here. You mentioned earlier, like, you don't have much of the normal process that most companies have. Mm-hmm. So how do you build in performance management in the form of feedback, development, succession planning, and all that?
Yeah.
So how does it look like?
The philosophy is that complex ecosystems don't need individual agents to do that shit. So if you think about it, like, you can either have performance management where someone's looking at each person and deciding what's, good or bad about them and telling them and trying to like make them better, yada, yada, yada. Or you can just have a marketplace and the marketplace will do that for you, right? Like, who does performance management for the 5,000 startups that come out of the Valley every year? Nobody. The market does it. Like, the ones that work, and the ones that don't work. So a lot of our philosophy has boiled down to that, which is like, we're all adults. We all know what we want to work on. If we're not willing to work on something, it doesn't matter if someone tells us to do it. If we want to engage in seeking feedback, we will. But ultimately, the market is the arbiter of what's working. And so that's why our project staffing model works the way it works. And that's why we promote a culture of retrospectives and feedback that's very open and multi-directional. So people that have issues with each other, ideally bring it up. People that do a great job get a lot of work, and people that don't. And if you're not getting the work that you want, or the respect that you want, or the recognition that you want in our system, you can go seek advice. You can go ask for feedback. You can ask for support. You can ask for training. All of that is available to you. But you are an adult, and you'll have to be the arbiter of deciding what you will and won't do to get what you want.
Yeah. I love the how you allude to treating adults as adults, right? And so having said that, have you experienced, you're being one of the founders, I guess, of the Ready and started this. Have you experienced any unofficial hierarchies, and is that still there, and how do you deal with it? Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Totally. Yeah. What a pain. So yeah, power doesn't go away. It just moves. And there are many different kinds of power, right? There's positional power, legal power, the power of influence and reputation, the power of privilege, that's all there. And so at best, the Ready has started to talk about that, but we believe that more power literacy and more transparency about our power structure is the next step for us. Mm-hmm. So I would not say that's something that we've nailed. What I can say is the people who do hold power in the Ready, either legal power or informal power, try pretty hard to not use it. And I my goal is to not have to do that. And so, it's like you reorient your ego from, I want to be the linchpin, I want to be needed, I want to be important and special, to I want to not be any of those things. And that's what makes me special, because I built a system where that's possible. And so my whole identity now is tied up in this idea of like, can the Ready work without me? If it can, then I'm special. But if it can't, then I screwed up. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm like giving you my therapy notes right now, like where I'm working on my own shit. But like, that's my narrative in my head, and that I have to both work on and work with. And so, yeah, there are definitely people in the Ready, people like, who's in charge, who's powerful, who's who has influence, people could easily point to who that is. It generally tracks with tenure. People that have been here longer tend to have more, and that makes sense of any tribe or community. But it is, yeah, it's something that we talk about quite a bit. And I think finding ways to change the system so that that's less and less prevalent is what's important to me. So things like not bringing a proposal to a new agreement when I know what to do, because I'm going to leave space, because I want to see if the system will do it. And then like nudging and provoking in a way that encourages that to happen, and building the habit of that, those sorts of things become the focus for me, at least.
Okay. It sounds like a nice coaching role model there. Yeah, I'd like to, there are a couple of questions around salaries, and basically, I also come from a company that sets its own salaries, and the whole transparency there. There's a bit of question, like, what are the criteria you would use, right, to set salaries, and for the advice process, how do you do that?
Yeah, we have a whole agreement that offers people advice about this. The basic advice, well, let me just see if I can bring it up. Let's just look at it. It'll be easier than me trying to whine on about it.
Is this agreement like available to share?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up so we can look at it.
Okay.
Let's see here, default rate. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again for fun and sport. Okay, so this is our default rate agreement, and it basically says how we do self-set pay. So it talks through, I'm not going to bore you all with every single word of this, but it talks through the detail of, what do we mean? So what is a default rate, how to think about it. It talks through the process of how we run that rate setting process. So here are some things to look at about our overall financial success. So people can look at the financial health of the firm. They can look at benchmark rates for other agencies and consultancies to give them a sense of what those look like. We have a default rate proposal that actually allows someone to input the answers to a certain set of questions. So basically the proposal is, what rate are you proposing? Why do you think that's the right rate? How experienced are you in the kind of transformation work that we do? How broad is your reputation in the space of the work that we do? Anything else you think we need to know? And that's basically the long and short of it. And then we have written over the years some different guides, like this evaluating rates guide, that helps people in that process if they want, right? So as you consider other people's proposals, things to think about. Do they have experience with our work or similar work? Do they have a track record of supporting our growth? Are they contributing to our rep and our thought leadership? So different ways of thinking about value. And then at the end of the day, everybody can see everyone else's rate. And so they would look and see, like, I have a couple years of experience. I feel like I contribute in this way. I feel similar to someone like a Phil or a Susan. What are they doing? And they're doing the same thing. And so then that becomes a conversation, and maybe the three of them go grab coffee and they talk about, how they came to this and what external benchmarks they used and how they modified those benchmarks for the internal reality of the ready, et cetera. So it's a lot of sense making like that. And then we give people a few formulaic things. So like, for example, because we have instability around projects, right? Like you might be on a project getting your default rate and you might not. We knew that there was some continuity risk there that we needed to compensate people for. And so we tell them, when you think you have your external rate, like a salary kind of in mind, we want you to multiply that. So it would be, what if you only got paid 11 months of the year? Because there might be 1 month where it just doesn't work out. So we actually want you to pay yourself as if there's going to be a month that doesn't happen. And so things like that help them kind of adjust and calibrate accordingly. But I mean, we charge a lot, we work a lot, and most people at the Ready make a lot. So there isn't a huge, right now, because we're not under financial stress, there's not a lot of stress about this either.
Thanks, Aaron. There's a question here, and it's quite interesting. How do you decide how much you bill a client for a project?
Yeah, it's a great question. So similarly, but much more formulaically. So we have a lot of flexibility about how people get paid. But when it comes to client projects, we tend to believe in a more fixed, transparent pricing schedule. So we have 3 services that we offer. They each have a default price point. There's maybe $5,000 of flexibility, like 5% flexibility in those price points, up or down, that people can exercise based on the context. And we have a different rate card for startups and nonprofits if we need to use that. Beyond that, it's fixed. And the way it's fixed is that we actually build a business model by saying, all right, this is the average cost of our people. This is how many people are going to go on a project. These are the variable expenses that go with that project. This is the amount of, carrying costs that we need to pay back for our general OpEx as a business. You add all that up and then you decide how much margin you want and you end up with a price. And for us, we've found that the external benchmark of 20% net income at the end of the year for a consultancy is sort of the average, what good looks like. So we build our model around that. And then, over time we can ratchet it up. If we become more successful, we can ratchet it down if we feel under pressure. But we start with that premise in mind. And so the average project at the Ready, if we're doing transformation, 2 to 3 people deployed against a client, in a dedicated way, is I think about $80,000 a month right now. A workshop is $20,000 for a day. Advisory contract where one member of the Ready is advising but not actually doing the change work, another leader or executive, can range from like $5 to $25K a month. And that's it. Like it's, you can write it on a napkin. And I really pride us on the fact that like our scopes of work fit on one page and can be written on a napkin, because there's enough shit to worry about in the world than having to read somebody's 15-page scope of work. Like, you get these people for this amount of time, focused on these things, for this much money every cycle. You can do as many cycles as you want. You can ask us to stop at any time. Like, let's do some business together. Let's put the rubber to the road.
Very nice and very pragmatic. Before we close, because we're almost out of time, I'd like to ask a little bit about the Murmur. So you could also share with us a little bit of that story, the backstory behind it.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we've always known at the Ready is that working with these really big systems is near impossible. And so we have 20 people, Boeing has 80,000. How's that going to work? And so we've thought about issues with scale and reach and impact forever, since before we were founded. And my feeling has been that a progressive tool to help with that was not going to be welcome in a world that wasn't ready to really, make change at scale. And so we waited. We just felt like the market was not ready and not ready and not ready. And then last year happened, and tragic though it has been and completely frustrating, moving the entire world to remote work, having a huge resurgence in the Black Lives Matter movement and a general awareness of Jedi and its importance, having a literal pandemic to deal with at a complexity level, has just, I think, awakened a humility and an openness and an urgency around new ways of working and thinking. And I was just like, this feels like the right time to plant a seed that could be a tree later. And so we treated it as an initiative initially last year, and then when it got to the point where it was ready to accept a larger amount of funding, we spun it out as its own corporation, raised $1.8 million into it from a variety of VCs and angels, and started to build a team. And now we have a 6-person team over there, on its way to 7 this week, actually. And we're about, if you drew a hill chart of being ready to share the product with the world, we're at the top of the hill and ready to do the slide part, which is fun.
That's very exciting. So for everyone, check out murmur.com if you haven't already. I did sign up to be on the wait list, so very excited to try that out.
Thank you.
So I think we're at the top of the hour. I just want to say thank you, Aaron, and thank you to everyone who participated and fielded in a lot of questions. I hope you learned something new today, and also you feel inspired to take bold actions. And we just want to thank you. And I think the next part of the program is take a break, get your lunches, get your coffee, and maybe join some of the community conversations that are happening afterwards, or join us at the lounge for like an apero, because it's actually almost 7:45 here in Switzerland. Thank
All
you,
right,
Eric.
I'll be on your time then for my lunch hour.
Yeah, indeed. Thank
Cheers.
you. And
There you go.
thanks, everybody.